I'm Mark Trexler with the Climatographers, developers of the Climate Web. Most of us who are involved in climate change are working on building climate narratives, whether we're building a narrative for ourselves, for a client, for our organization, for our family members. We're all trying to build climate narratives of one kind or another. And in many cases, we're relying on Google to search for the right information with which to build that narrative. Now, it's always been the case that you could search Google for almost any climate-related issue and get 50 million hits. I recently did a Google search on a climate topic and got 3 billion hits. The problem is that there's a whole climate change information industry that continues to pump out information, just adding to this growing mountain of climate change information. Lack of information is not the problem when it comes to climate change decision making. It's the fact that that information is not getting to the right decision makers, whether individuals, policymakers, CEOs. The information that would influence their decision making is not getting through the great wall of information barriers to the people where it would actually make a difference. So what I want to explore in this video is the question of how can we help the right information get to the right person at the right time? How can we begin to tear down this great wall? For purposes of this video, I'm going to be using the Climate Web, but the video really isn't about anything specific in the Climate Web. I'm going to use it as a way to show you different ways of organizing information to see whether it triggers your own thoughts about how climate change information could be better organized for your purposes. But you can visit the Climate Web at theclimateweb.org, and there's a lot for you right here on the front page that you'll come into. What I'm going to do in the video is juxtapose getting 50 million or 3 billion Google hits on a particular search with the idea of climate information knowledge management. Now I'm starting with this particular screen, which is sources headings. And imagine having 15,000 key books, reports, journal articles organized by several hundred topical headings like the one shown here. I'm not going to spend much time on any of these screens. You can stop the video and take a more detailed look. I just want to show you sort of the ideas involved here. So here we have sources headings in terms of documents, books, etc. And what if you had 30,000 to 40,000 news stories and opinion pieces organized by hundreds of headings specific to that category of information, a few of which are shown here? And what if you were able to access thousands of graphics from those reports, from those news and opinion pieces, and have those graphics organized topically into several hundred headings, some of which you can see here? And the same for ideas. What if ideas on a similar topic could be pulled together from lots of different source documents and organized under knowledge base headings like they are here? These are just a few of, for example, the 500 knowledge base headings in the Climate Web. What if you could access several thousand videos relevant to climate change, again, topically organized? And what if you could organize thousands of websites and web pages, again, organized according to hundreds of topics, some of which you can see here? And what if all of the information that I've been describing up to this point could be organized through a comprehensive index, and in this case, 3,000 index entries covering almost every conceivable climate change topic that organizes those sources and news stories and videos and websites specific to each of these index topics? What if the entire structure that I've sort of been talking about up to this point weren't static? What if it could be reorganized to suit particular purposes? So for example, what if you wanted to organize a Save the Climate conference and you wanted to know what are all of the different topics that ought to be included there and how can I dig into those topics most efficiently? Well, that's what's organized here on the screen. Or if you wanted to think about who you might invite to that Save the Climate conference. This is by no means written in stone, obviously, but here are a lot of the experts whose work is covered in the Climate Web, and you can dig into their bodies of work simply by clicking on their names. What if the thousands of headings that I've been talking about could be filtered for specific sectors, for specific audiences, for specific topics, allowing you to zero in on exactly what you're looking for without having to spend hours searching through thousands of hits? That's what we're doing in this view. This is specific to finance sector headings, but it can be done for any topic or audience. Now, when it comes to building a climate narrative, here's where we start to truly diverge both qualitatively and quantitatively from Google hits. So what if you could organize questions and answers on all sorts of topics where you have the question and then you pull together the best available information to answer that question from throughout the available information? Here we have a whole series of Q&A on the social cost of carbon, with each question linked to answering information from specific sources. And you can simply click on these questions to get to those sources. What if you could take the hundreds of thousands of information building blocks that we've now accumulated through the process that I've been describing and organize them by very specific topics? So this is a dashboard, for example, focused on carbon pricing, 2-degree scenario. What is the carbon price that would be required to achieve a 2-degree scenario? There's quite a bit of work on this out there, but to actually find the best available graphics, the best available sources, a lot of the information that gives you a very quick look at these questions, that's what's pulled together here. And so in a few minutes, you can access information that would take you many hours to otherwise pull together. This is just one of several hundred dashboards already pre-populated in the Climate Web. Now, if you're building your climate narrative and it has something, in this case, to do with the oil sector, what about being able to pull up who said what when? What about being able to see how people have been talking about the oil sector's relationship to climate change over the last 60 years and being able to click on any of these thoughts to get back to the original source document? And what if you could do that for other sectors and other topics? This oil sector example is just one example. And for purposes of your climate narrative, what if it would be useful to be able to explore the topic of climate impacts and how might climate impacts affect whatever audience you are trying to develop a narrative for? In this particular case, these are impacts that are already happening based on scientific review, but there are other screens for forecasted impacts, for potential impacts. These can all be filtered for top by sector, by geography, in all sorts of ways, because once you've built sort of these several 100,000 building blocks, you can organize them just like Legos, for example. You can organize them in thousands of ways to meet specific narrative needs. Similarly, what if your narrative is focused on what specific actors ought to be doing to help tackle climate change? There are lots of actors out there, from the executive branch to Congress to federal agencies to individuals to companies. What if those recommendations for action that are spread throughout the literature were pulled together so that you could access the thinking on, for example, as shown here, what state public utilities commissions should be doing on climate change? But what if you could also access what 20 other actors should be doing simply by clicking on a particular thought? What if you wanted to do a brainstorming within your organization or company, for example, on what climate change might mean to you in the future and the questions that you really ought to be asking, for example, as part of a scenario planning process? So here we have some of those questions at the company level, but other sets of questions are at the sector level, at the topic level. Again, building blocks that can be reorganized to meet specific narrative needs. And what if you wanted to be able to challenge assumptions that currently exist about where climate change is headed? We all have assumptions. A lot of them are out of date given how rapidly this topic is moving. Here we have an assumptions audit overlay. These are assumptions that would tend to support continuation of the status quo, but you can click on any of these assumptions and find the pro and con arguments that link back to original sources. So you can really push back on assumptions that may not make sense. But of course, there are also the assumptions for exactly the flip side of this that you can take advantage of. What I've been showing you in this video is some of the ways that we are slicing and dicing information, climate change information in the climate web to help support specific climate narratives. And I think you might see now why one user of the climate web has characterized it in this slide the way they have. In terms of the climate web is like having 100 leading experts collaborating with you at the decision-making table. And that's a great way to think about the idea of climate narrative, because to build your climate narrative, what could be better than having the right 100 experts sitting with you at your table to discuss your specific narrative needs? But there's a whole other aspect to the climate web, because a lot of this information you can find it, but how can you personalize your access to that information so that it's really useful to you? And there are several ways to do that. What's shown on this screen is a front door for a particular person. And these are the topics that that person has organized that wants to have access to at any given time. Through a simple URL, Nigel is able to access this list and go from there, saving a ton of time. Anyone can do this, for an individual, for a topic, for a company, for a course that they're teaching. Almost there's no limit to the ability to sort of personalize your experience with the climate web. Now, what you can also do is access the climate web through a Teambrain so that you can work on it and modify it yourself for your own purposes. And you can download either slices of or the entire climate web and build your own knowledge management system, taking advantage of the 20,000 hours that we've spent building the climate web to begin with. So lots of ways to really focus in, to help you focus in on your climate narrative. That wraps up this video. Again, have not gone into a lot of detail of the many ways that you can use the climate web, but you can take a look at the user's guide. You can see How Can I videos. We're happy to take questions and comments, and we would really welcome the opportunity to discuss how the several 100,000 information building blocks that we've put together in building the climate web can be directed in one way or another toward helping you build a better climate narrative for whatever audience you're addressing.